I'm Sheila and welcome back to my channel, Seaside Snuggles Quilts, Patterns, and Crafts, where I focus mainly on quilts, but will craft anything that tickles my fancy. Today we're going to work on part 2 of the cat quilt, Koshki quilt, El Gato, I don't know, we'll figure it out, it'll be in the thumbnail. But this time we're going to work on the feet and we're going to work on the layout of the quilt in its entirety. And as a bonus, I'll have some options for making individual cats within this quilt if you want it to look a little different. So I hope you'll join me. A link to the pattern is down in the description below. Also, here's a QR code if you would like to just scan it with your phone. I'll have this again at the end of the video and some thoughts on how the whole thing went. I'm pretty happy with it. I think you'll enjoy making it, so I hope you'll join me for the leg part, the second part of this quilt. For a little recap, in the last video we made these 3 cat body blocks, and now we're going to make the legs. All right, we're ready to do the leg sections of our cat blocks. We're going to make 3 leg sections for the 3 cat blocks, and I'm going to show you what they look like. I made this strip of 3 blocks thinking I might make a table runner or something from it, and I made legs on each side. And I know you're not going to be able to see all of this in frame, but you see this is a repeat in one direction, and it's black, white, then brown. This is not our repeat in our quilt. In our quilt, it's brown, white, and black. So this is in reverse. Now, I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees. Now we're in the right direction because we're talking about these cats. So white, black, and brown, right? Brown would be on the other end, but the sequence is the same. So I want to point out something to you here. We'll just do this block since this is the block that we finished. And facing us, this is the leg block. Notice that the legs match the body, which it should. This side, on the right hand side, these 2 fabrics match the cat that is the opposite cat. And these background fabrics over here are actually the legs of the black block that will be underneath. So when you're making the legs for your cat section, you're going to have the leg part match the cat, and this part should be the color that is not in this section of the block. So see how it's black here? And also see how it's black here, the background piece. So it's the color that's not in the brown and white block. This section here to the right matches the brown and white block. Here, because we're 180 degrees out, it's the same block. It matches the brown and white block. It's just rotated so that it goes up with the correct color leg. All right, so let's look at the next one just to kind of drive that home a little bit. What we're looking for when we're trying to figure out which legs go with which cat body is a different color in the background on the back side of the legs. So in this case, our quilt block is gray and white. So the legs will be white on this side, and the background is brown, which is the third color that's not here. Here, the legs are black, but the background color is brown, which is not the color here. You only need 1 set of legs per row. You don't need to do this on each side. This is kind of for a demonstration. Or if you want to finish the top with legs, you can do that. But what I want to point out here is that all of your legs, this is a block minus this other pair of blocks. That other pair of legs would be for the next block up, right? So if you're making your legs one way, black with brown in the background versus black with white in the background here. I mean, white with brown in the background, which is what's on the other side. Remember that. Then do them all the same way. I apologize for the iron. Make them all consistently. If you're going to do black with brown in the background, all of your other sets are going to kind of fall into place to line up on this side of your cat body block. If you purchase the pattern has it this way and this way only to avoid any confusion. But if you accidentally do it the other way, just continue doing it that way. Your cats will be traveling in the opposite direction. I mean, they're still going to be facing to the right, but the sequence is going to be in the opposite order. But if you just continue making your foot sections the same way and are consistent, you will be fine. Okay? So your cats are still going to be facing to the right. Just the order of the focus cat is going to be changed. If you just follow the pattern and make your legs the way they are illustrated in the pattern, you won't have any problems. If you have a problem, you find that you did it the opposite way, just continue doing it that way. Okay, so these are the legs we're going to make. And I just used a 2.5 inch strip to cut all of my parts because I'm doing this separately from doing the other blocks. So you can do that, or you can follow the instructions in the pattern. And what you're going to need are one of each color measuring 5 1/4, one of each color measuring 4 1/4. These are pairs, so I've got 2 pairs of each color measuring 1.5 by 2.5, and pairs measuring 1.5 inch square. Okay, so I have my sample here, but if you just print out the page that has your blocks on it, you'll have a reference to get started, but I'm just going to use this as my reference. So in this case, let's set this over here for a moment. You won't need these for a minute. What I want to do is I want to separate my fabrics into 3 piles, and I'm starting with the 5 1/4 inch rectangles. And then this is going to be my back thigh. Let me bring this down a little bit. This large piece is your back thigh piece. So I'm just going to line up my fabrics based on that. So as you saw, the white thigh piece had black as the background. So I'm going to take the 4.5 inch piece and I'm going to line it up on the left hand side. That only leaves 2 other colors, so I really don't need to do any work. I know that I'm not going to have 2 matching colors together. So this short brown piece is going to go with the gray, and this short white piece is going to go with the brown. Okay. Now I could stack these all on top of each other and cut them, but I think I'm just going to cut them, the pairs at a time. And when I cut these, I'm going to use my ruler again, and I'm going to use the 45-degree angle on the edge of my rectangles with both rectangles on the left-hand side. And last time we moved our ruler up until it was at 1/2 inch mark. This time we're going to slide it up until it's at the 1/4 inch mark. So I'm going to line up the 45-degree angle here with the edge of my 2 rectangles, and then I'm going to slide it up until I'm at the 1/4 inch mark here on my intervals. Then I'm going to slice this. Okay, like so. I'm just going to put these pieces back up here for right now. I'm going to stack these, make sure that my left hand side is lined up, and we're going to do the same thing on this stack of 4. And I mean, you can do several stacks at once. Don't make your cut sufficient. All right, so there's my 45-degree angle, slid up to the 1/4 inch mark, and then I'm going to give it a slice. All right. And we're going to make all of these 3 leg sets at the same time. Now that we have our cuts made, we can actually lay out the whole thing, but I find it's easier to sew my first rotation, get things pressed, and then lay the rest out. So for this, my short piece, I'm going to rotate 180 degrees and place over here like this. Then I'm going to take the triangle that's on the bottom, which matches that piece, and I'm going to rotate that as well, and I'm going to bring it over here. So I'm going to take the triangle from the bottom here, rotate it, and put it here. Take the triangle from the bottom, rotate it, and put it here. And what you want is for the flat edge of your triangle to be aligned with the long edge of your rectangle. Okay? When we sew these, and we're going to sew them all the same way, we're going to flip the triangle over and we're going to line up the 45-degree angle and the horizontal long line of your rectangle. And then we'll be sewing down this seam right here. So you can see this little corner? That's perfect. You want this lined up and this lined up, and you should be able to see this little corner. So I'm going to position all of these. And these are going to be your short rectangle shapes that end up making the front part of your legs. Then I like to rotate these around because I like to have everything in the same direction when I'm sewing at the machine. It makes things go a little bit faster. And we're going to do the same thing. Make sure that flat edge is along the long side. And we're lining up this side and this side. Okay, so stack those up. And before I actually sew, I'm going to take pairs of these and I'm going to separate them into fabrics that have one of each. So we're going to prepare these to sew together. Okay, so those need to be sewn together. And then I'm going to take one set of these and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to have my grays, and I need a brown to go with that gray and a white to go with that gray, and then the brown and the white. And we're going to sew these along the long side. Okay, so this is going to be our first iteration of sewing. Let's go to the machine. All right, so I'm going to start with these little guys first. These are my 1.5-inch squares. Then I'm going to do my rectangles. Remember, we're sewing these on the long edges. Then I'm going to do my short rectangles with the triangles. And be careful not to stretch these because they are cut on the bias. Okay, and then we've got the 3 longer ones that started off as 5.25-inch rectangles. And I'm just realizing I'm going to have to make some cat body blocks because I used the last ones to make that other thing. So at this point I've sewn these blocks all kinds of ways, and I've found that after this first iteration, I personally like to press all of my seam allowances open. I just feel like the block lays a little better, but it's not imperative that you do that, just so you know. So I'm going to press all of these seam allowances open. I want to give everything a little bit of a spritz. And as you know, I like to start with a finger press and then work to my iron. So finger press, finger press. All right, so everything is cut. Now we're gonna, or pressed. Now we're going to square up our seam allowances, or square up our blocks, sections. Yeah, sections. So we still have these 1.5 by 2.5 inch pieces as well. And we are just going to square these up. These largest, let's get organized a little bit so that you can see what's what. So these large rectangles should be squared up to 4.5 by 2.5. And they actually should be pretty close. You shouldn't have much to cut away here. 4.5 by 2.5. Make sure that you get your 45-degree stitch line in the corner. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be close. Okay. And you'll see that they're really close enough that you might opt not to square them up. Sometimes I will pass up squaring, just for the sake of being expeditious. These shorter ones should measure 2.5 by 3.5. So, a funny thing happened when I was making the first video. Things were going great. And then when it came around to making this second part, my files were not good. So this is my third time recording this section, but I'm recording on a new camera. I was so disappointed in the quality of my Batty Bats that I broke down and bought a new camera, and it'll take me probably a whole year of being on YouTube to pay for it. But the footage is so much better, and the sound quality isn't as, it doesn't seem anyway, as corruptible, so worth it. All right, my loves, here's what we have. We have 4.5 inch pieces, we have 3.5 inch pieces, we still have our 2.5 inch squares made from these two strips, and we also have these 2.5 by 1.5 inch sections. Now we're going to lay out all three of our leg parts. So remember that these parts are that back thigh, so they should be oriented with the triangle to the bottom left. The next thing we want to put on here are the toes. Now you're going to match the color, the two colors in the thigh to the two colors in your two-piece section here, and you're going to rotate it so that the piece that matches the triangle is on top. So brown and white, triangle, that piece is on top. Brown and gray, triangle, this piece is on top. Okay, so that's so far. The next piece that's going to go on is our front leg, and in this case we're still going to use the same colors, so gray and white. And in this one I'm going to put this piece on with the triangle on the top right. Here's white and brown, triangle at the top right, and brown and gray, triangle at the top right. Then we're going to need one of these pieces per row for an extension on the leg. We're going to match the triangle color, and the triangle color. We'll put these down. Now we've got our two-piece blocks. We are going to now switch to the color that matches the legs but is not this color. So in this case we have gray and white, but it's not this one. It's going to be with this one. So because we have the gray legs and we don't have the cream on this row yet, that's where it goes, and you want to rotate it so that the bottom, which is the toe, matches the leg. Okay, so same here. We want the tan of these two. I'm going to let you guess. Which one do you think goes with this center row? It's this one. You want the brown because that's the color of the legs, but you don't want this color to be the same on this row. So you're going to rotate it so the toe is here, and here this one matches the legs, which is the cream, and the other color is opposite, or the third color, not the second color. So you want to rotate it so the toe is on the bottom like that. And then finally we still have our 2.5 inch by 1.5 inch second piece. Those are going to match the top color on your two-piece section. So my brown is going to go here, my gray is going to go here, and my white is going to go here. These are for the white cat, these are for the brown cat, these are for the black cat, because they have the full leg in this section. So I'm going to sew these together, and what I recommend is that you sew this section together, so these 3 pieces, and you sew these 3 pieces together. Let's go sew these together. I will record it, but I don't have anything to say because it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to sew this to this, this to this, and then I'm going to grab these pieces and sew them on the end of here, these pieces, sew them on the end of here. You can square up your, I call these chiclets when they only have 2 pieces, but I don't square them up. But you can square them up, especially if you sew a little wonky like I do. Okay, now we're going to sew these on. I do not enjoy opening seams, but I do enjoy the results of opening seams. That's why you won't see me do it very often unless I find it useful, because typically I'm going to be nesting my seams. So I'm just going to finger press these. I'm not going to get the iron on them at all for this section. These I'm just pressing towards the thighs. So I've got 2 brown pieces, so I know it doesn't go with that one, right? It's pretty easy to get them back where they go. Now we're going to put these on. Make sure that triangle is in the top right before you flip it over. And then this is going to go on here. And before I sew these 3, I am going to flip them over so they can control the direction of my seam allowances. Let's sew. All right, so I'm going to finger press this. Now I have finger pressed these away from center, but when you really press them, you want to press them towards the middle. Okay, that's why this seam is open. Both of these can be pressed away from this section. Okay, let's talk about something really quick after I get this finger pressed in the correct direction so that I know which way I want to actually press it. So if you look at these sections without this on there, right? Is this right side up or is this upside down? Do you know? I'm going to tell you how to tell. Remember, you have a long piece, a long rectangle, and a short rectangle. The long rectangle should be on the left, so all of these need to be rotated like that. The long 4.5-inch rectangle should be to the left, and the shorter 3.5-inch rectangle should be to the right of this centerpiece. Now, once we have that squared away, we know where these pieces go, because remember, only the color of the main legs, the color that's going to match. So you want to match this back leg. Of course, you want a matching front leg. So here, both of these have a matching front leg, right? I can stick that there, or I can stick that there. But remember, to get our tessellation, we need this color to be different from this color. So it's not going to be this piece, it's going to be this piece that goes here. Okay? Here, for these dark legs, since we have these two left, we have the dark and we have the lighter one. Both match the toes, they have the right toe color. Which one goes? This one, because you don't want to have another brown there. So that's going to go there, and that leaves this one. So you're going to rotate it with the brown side to the left, and it will go with this piece. If you do everything else the same way and end up with your blocks with the big rectangle in the center, just be consistent. Everything will be fine. For this quilt, though, we're starting with the legs like this. So, opposite day, and opposite day. All right, so these are the legs that we're making for our blocks. I'm going to flip these on top. We'll take these to the sewing machine and finish up these strips. All right, so I'm going to give these a good press. We'll talk about the pressing direction, and then I'm going to have to take a little break and make 3 more blocks so that we can put these on and talk about how to connect the blocks. I forgot that I'd already sewn those blocks, and I don't want to rip them. So, for the seam allowances on this, you can press this the way it wants to go, this the way it wants to go, but these 2 seams press towards the middle, and that will put them in the right place no matter which way you do your feet, because you will need to nest on the next step, and it's better to have these 2 pressed towards that middle part. The rest you can press open, you can press to the side. It won't matter because there'll be nothing else to nest. So this is what, that will look like from the back. Now you can square this up if you want to before you sew it onto your blocks, but I usually don't. I just kind of leave it. So everything goes the way it naturally wants to go, except for around this 1.5 inch two block, two patch. All right. And one more. Ooh, hot. And I'll be back. Okay, it's much later in the evening, but I have my 3 blocks made and we have our legs. And the easiest way to match the legs to the correct block is to start with the legs. And so let's grab this. A little pop quiz. Is this right side up? The answer is no. You're looking for 2 full legs with the feet towards you. And in this case, we have 1 leg of one color and 1 leg of another color, and they're not complete. So rotate it around 180 degrees. Now we have 2 complete legs, a front and a back, that are white. So this is going to go with the white cat. I'm going to scooch this down a little bit. And we have 2 blocks with white cats, right? We've got the black and white, and we've got the black and brown. So if you remember our rule, if our legs have a gray background here, then we don't want it to have a gray background for the other cat. We want it to match this little bit of foot right here. So the correct answer for this set of legs is this block. So these will go together. When we put these together, this second seam, we press these 2 seams in, and this seam is this way. So this seam is this way. When you flip it over, this second seam will nest. Nothing else is going to match up with anything. So if you want to press these other seams open, you can. The reason that I press the first set of seams open is because these we're going to get bulky here. And on this diagonal, when you're joining your blocks, it's a little bulky there. But the second set of seams, if you want to press them open, feel free. Now, this is already set up so that in your sewing direction, your seam allowances are going to be pressed together, but I'm just going to stick a pin there anyway. All right, so we have 1 done. Let's grab another pair of legs and take a look at it. Is it right side up? That's the first question. The answer is yes. We have 2 full feet that are brown. So we only have 1 block left that has brown on it. And this opposite cat matches this little set of feet here. So this goes with this. Same thing. This second seam is going to nest. Nothing else is going to need to be lined up. It's a super easy addition to the block. Just make sure that you're lined up at this end and at this end. If you're long, you can either, shorten your seams, or you can snip this off just a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to make it fit. This is our last block, and this is our last set of legs, so it must go with this block, but white side or black side, well, the feet are gray, so we need the gray side. Like that. Now our little partial feet match the opposite cat. Now we're ready to go sew these. Second seam. And nest that. Now I didn't square up this strip, but if you want to, it squares up to 2.5 inches by 12.5 inches if you want to get that size down correctly. But let's go sew these. Okay, so I'm just going to match this up. This is the seam that's nesting. Then we're just going to make sure that the rest is lined up with the edge underneath. And once we get about here, we want to make sure that this last corner is lined up as well. All right, here's the second block. And the third block. Okay, so I'm going to give these all a spritz of water and we'll talk about the direction we want to iron these. And I'm just spritzing it. I'm not spritzing the whole block every time. I'm just spritzing the seam that I want to press. And I've already pressed these in opposite directions from one another. So I know that the brown's not going to go next because two brown tails are not going to be side by side. Let's move that up a little bit. Okay, so I know this is not a good sequence, but this one is. So it's basically the main character winds up being on top. The main character ends up being on top. That's kind of how I remember it. As far as which one is first, it depends on what row you're on. And because my rows have 5 blocks, putting these 3 together, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to tack, you know, something on the opposite ends, or it'll end up at the end. So it doesn't really matter. But just decide how you want the seam allowances to go. Have those be opposite one another, and then sew your rows together. Okay, my card got full because I'm using temporary cards, but on this row, I press my seam allowances away from the cat faces and towards the cat faces. On another row, I press them alternating all up and all down. It's up to you. You can swap it around from row to row, whatever you feel like doing on that row. You just want the every other block to nest at three points. Okay, so whatever you choose to do, it will really help you to keep your cats aligned, which will keep your tessellation looking right. So for this one, I had both of my seam allowances towards the center face. So I just did this seam allowance in the opposite direction, and that gives me kind of a channel and key system of keeping my blocks straight. You could press them all up and then press your alternate ones all down. You could, I don't know if there's another alternative, but the option is yours. I just suggest that you lock your seam allowances by pressing them in alternate directions. So that's the black one. Here's the brown one. If we look at the back, I have the seam allowances away from the face. So this one I'm going to press towards the body so that these two are coming together. Again, you don't have to do this. You could do all up and all down. And I like to press from the front unless I'm having a really hard time getting the seam allowance to lay down. but this way I make sure that I'm properly open. So that's the brown kitty. And then this one I have towards the faces, so this bottom one I'm going to have towards the feet. And because we have those diagonal seams open, it lays over pretty easily. All right. So here's our white cat block. It is established as the white cat block now because we have the feet on it, our brown, and our gray. So when we want to put these together, we want, if we were going to start with black, say, the next block would have black on top. The block after that is going to have brown on top, matching the main character here. So if it helps you to remember, the main character ends up on top. Main character ends up on top. All right. And when we put these together, you can see how these parts of background fabric end up turning into the feet for the next white cat. Here, this little black part ends up completing the feet for this part, which is the black cat. All right, so when we put these together, when I flip this over, this is going to nest with this seam, this is going to nest with this seam, and this is going to nest with this seam where the legs are. Okay, those 3 points. And when I sew them together, I just want to make sure that my top and bottom are lined up. These are nested, and then it's easy peasy. You might want to pin. I'm not going to pin the ones that are going to be pressed together by the presser foot on their own, but I am going to press this one here. It may be different for you. If you may want to press these two. It depends on how you press your seam allowances. So the ones that are facing the presser foot, I'm not gonna bother to pin. Okay, let's go sew this. All right, so I'm just going to make sure that the top is lined up to start with. Make sure that I'm going to get a full 1/4 inch on my measurement here. Make sure the sides are aligned. And this is my first nesting right here. So, all right, so I'm going to continue to my second nesting. Okay, and then get my third nesting lined up. Okay, let's take it off and see what we've got. All right, so that's how these are put together. Now this looks a little weird right here, and I know why. I think I got a little narrow right there. I did. So I'm going to fix that. So the good part of having your seam allowances pressed just towards the edge is that you can make a correction and not have to pick out the seam because the seam is open. I do tend to get a little wobbly. When I am fiddling with taking pins out. But I want to set a good example. But I'll admit, I don't always do it when I'm not on camera. All right, so I'm going to press my seam allowance this way. Doesn't matter really which way you do it. I feel like this is still a little wonky, but I'm going to leave it. All right. Give that a press. And now it's ready to have the next block sewn on. Okay, So I'm continuing my legs here. Nothing else is matching up same color to same color up here. This time my seam allowances are in opposite direction, so I have two that I'm going to want to pin, which is this one at the top. This one I don't have to nest because it's going to be pressed in by the presser foot, but this last one I do want to nest. Make sure that it's nice and tight. All right, let's go sew this. Okay, I'm going to get my tops lined up. Okay, get my next seam allowance squared away right here. Hold that with my fingers. Okay, and here's my last one that I have a pin in. And then last but not least, I want to line up my bottom corners. Okay, and I'm just going to press this one to the right as well. When I do the next row, I don't need to change my pressing direction because these are offset by 25%. So your next blocks are not going to line up straight up and down here. They're going to be off by 25%, so you don't have to worry about alternating your seam allowances. And if you have to flip them, then it's not a big deal. But here's my group of 3 cats here. This is the 3-piece section that I did already, and we're going to be duplicating row 4 because I'm adding another row onto the quilt, and that row has 4 pieces starting, 4 whole pieces starting with this white piece. So remember I said it didn't matter which order you put this in because you'd be able to attach your 4th piece and then your end pieces to make it whole. So this one's going to start with white, and I'll put a little snapshot on the screen and circle the one that I'm working on, that I'm duplicating. So these 2 pieces are going to be sewn together, and they're going to nest here, here, and here. It's going to continue this leg, and these cat colors are going to be distinct. So the white is not going to touch the white, but you will have your 2nd and 3rd color touch at the tails. Okay, so I am going to sew it this way so the block is at the bottom so I can see this little triangle here, though I don't think it's going to make a difference. And then I'll be back. Okay, so this is sewn together. Let's take a look at it. So this is upside down, and I have all of my other seams going to the left. So this is the one spot that I was a little worried about, and not really worried about, but that's the one that you should, if you have a problem, that's probably where it's going to be. So I'm going to give this a press in the same direction as the other seam allowances on this row. And now I have 4 blocks, and I will circle those, but I have 4 blocks starting with the white cat, black cat, brown, and then white again. So now I need a partial block for the beginning of this row and a partial block for the end of this row, and that's where my other 2 blocks come together. Remember, I made 3 of each, and I did not press these. Why did I not press these? Is because I need to see how they're going to go. So if you look at these 2 whites that are at opposite ends of this section right now, that is 4 blocks wide, you'll notice that this white one is pressed away from the cat faces, and this white one is pressed towards the cat faces because we're alternating every other one, but we have 3 blocks. So within the row, 2 blocks are going to be towards the face, and, or sorry, One block is going to be toward the face and its sister block is going to be away from the face. Same thing with these. So I can tell by what's already on the row which direction I need to sew this block. So this block is towards the face, so this one needs to be away from the face, and it already is because I pressed them all away from the face initially, right, for my preliminary press, and I'm just gonna press this towards the cat because that's how I'm doing these rows, so that all the sections nest. And now this will be ready to go on this end because it's the next one in sequence. And I'm going to show you the back. And it will nest because these are towards the face, these are away from the face, this is away from the body section, these are towards the body section. Okay? This block is away from the faces, so I need to change these seam allowances so they're towards the faces. And I'm just going to move this out of the way temporarily to do that. And I'm going to give it a little spritz of water because it's easier to change the direction when it's a little damp. And I'm just going to start with this one. Just give it a little bit of a press to get it going. This is why I liked opening these seams at the ears, because it helps to distribute some of this bulk here. All right, so these two are going to be pressed away from the body towards the face and towards the feet. That's just how I'm choosing to press these seam allowances. You can alternate all up and all down. It's up to you. All right, get that open again, and then I will press this from the front. Get this open again. All right, now we'll give this a press. Make sure that the seams are open or straight. Okay. All right. Now, as I said, this is row 4. So when you look at the diagram for row 4, the this is the block that's going to start it as a partial block. And you can see in sequence, brown, white, black. So you can tell what the sequence is. I like to cut these before I sew them on, but you can sew them on and then cut them to size if you want to. The reason I like to cut them before I sew them on is the brown block and the white block can be continued around from the row before it. So we'll address that. The black blocks, however, which is going to be at this end, use 75% of the block, which means you're going to cut it to 9.5 inches, and you're not going to have enough to use on another row. Not that you need it. There's not a row that takes 25% of the front. So we're going to start with this side because you're not going to use any more of it after this. So I'm just going to get my mat, and I'm going to use my 12.5 inch ruler, and I'm going to cut from the left side, because this is going on the right side of the quilt, 9.5 inches. And I'm going to rotate this. Make sure that it's facing the correct way. You want to cut from this side. If it's on the right side of the quilt, you need to cut the left side of the block. So I'm going to square this up a little bit first because I can see that it's a little wonky over here. Just one section is a little bit short, so I'm going to cut this as straight as I can and still keep my tail the right width. Then I'm going to rotate it and I'm going to cut 9.5 inches from the straight edge that I just made. More or less straight. See, I've got a little bit there, but it's fine. I want the tail to be at 1.5 inches, the seam for the tail, and that will keep my tessellation consistent. All right, and I'm going to give this a cut. 9.5 inches. So this now measures 3 inches, which is not big enough for the short strip section. So you can't use this for another part of the quilt. This quilt anyway, all right? But you can use these sections, like this part is whole. So if you didn't want to make this again and you were making a partial block, you could use that again, just FYI. All right, so this part is going to go on the right hand side. Now, you might notice that I have a seam right here. I've got about 1/4 of an inch here of the other part of the block. But I also have the remaining part of this block in the seam allowance. And so I want to get this little bit of bulk out here. So I'm going to pick this away. And just remove this 2 layers from the seam allowance. Okay, and I got to get it out of this section here as well, like so. So that's what I've cut out, and it's folded in half. So I'm removing 2 layers from right here. And you might want to go in and just re-sew this, because this is now going to be on the edge of your quilt. All right, so let's talk about the other block. This is the piece that's going to go on the left hand side of the quilt, so we're going to need to cut the right hand side. So I'm going to start by squaring up. I'm a little wrinkled here, but it's fine. And my mat is, you know, probably small for this job. Let's do this. I'm going to put it on the diagonal so I can get 2 sides on the mat. Like so. All right, so that's my first edge. And I'm squaring up this whole block because I want to demonstrate that you can use both of these pieces in the 5 block layout of this quilt. Okay, so we're squared up. And the first thing I want to cut is the piece that is going to begin my row. And that piece is going to be a 25% piece front. So I need 3.5 inches from this piece. So I'm rotating it so that the right side is towards me. And I'm going to measure 3.5 inches. And then I'm going to cut. Okay. Now again, I have 1/4 of an inch of fabric here that I could just sew this, but I think it's neater if you take that little piece out. And so you could just sew it because your stitches are going to be right on top of these existing stitches. but you have 1/4 of an inch of fabric here. So I'm going to start by pulling out a couple of threads here, and then I'm going to pull all of these threads here. Okay, and I'm going to pull this little section off. This is what that looks like. Okay, that's garbage. And we're going to pull all of our threads out. And when you unfold this, you see that you have all of the, all of the fabric that you need to complete this 3.5 inch section. It was just in the seam allowance. So I'm going to give that a press. And I'm going to re-sew this little section right here. That's too much to leave open. So I'm going to sew this. I'm going to put that on the machine. And then let's talk about the other side. So the row above it needs a 6.5 inch section from this same block, but the left side, because it's going to be on the right side of the last row. Wrap around, and then you'll have this. But you have 8.5 inches here. What you need is 6.5 inches. So I'm going to cut this as well. I'm going to rotate it so the butt is towards me. And then I'm going to measure 6.5 inches from this end. Now I don't need this because I already have that row complete, but if I was in the middle of making my quilt, I would cut this 2 inches out. This is not something you're going to be able to use. This is 2.5 inches actually. So this is 2.5 inches that we've cut out of here. But if you were using a partial block, one, this is in the middle, so you can't use it. And two, you would need 2.5 inches. You would need 3.5 inches actually for the 25% offset. So what you can do with this though is if you want to salvage some of your fabric, this is already 2.5 inches. You have a ton of 2.5 inch pieces that you need in subsequent blocks. So you can salvage, and I don't recommend pulling it apart this way, but you can salvage these 2 pieces of fabric and this piece of fabric to make your 2.5 by 1.5 inch pieces. And I wouldn't leave that seam in there. Again, I wouldn't pull it apart this way because you do damage the fabric some, but for expediency, these are the 3 pieces of fabric that you can salvage to make your 2.5 by 1.5 inch pieces for subsequent blocks if you're working, you know, a row at a time. So don't throw them away. It's still useful. These, you could probably make a cute border with these somehow. I don't know. I didn't think about that until just now, but I could probably make a border with these pieces. So, anywho, 6.5 inch piece for the right side of row 3. You have 2 sections with fabric already in them that you can pull out of there and just use the existing seam allowance, and that's what I did. So even though I'm not personally using this piece, this is exactly what I did for the rows where I did use this piece. I pulled that apart, I pulled this apart, and then I pulled these stitches out. And of course, you can just build these from scratch and cut, you know, the appropriate pieces to size. Those measurements are in the pattern as well. But for the pieces that wrap around, this really is the easiest way. And you get to practice your picking. she says sarcastically. Who needs practice picking? You get enough of it. So make sure you pull all of your threads out before you sew it back together so you don't trap them in a way that they're going to show. All right, so that is that section that would finish, and then we have one more down here. So I'm going to get the horizontal piece first so it comes out. So like two or three stitches. And then after you get all these picked out, you can give it a little press to make it a little easier to sew. And so these are for the garbage. I'm going to move this. So I'm going to give this a little bit of a press because I've got 3 points where I want to close these seams. Okay. So there's 1 point. Here's 2 points. And I just want to get it flat so that I can line it up properly. And then this little one right here. So make sure I get this out of the way. All right, so I'm going to go sew all of these little open spots, and then I'll show you how they turn out, and then we'll sew them onto the row. All right, so we have all of these sewn. And then we're just going to reestablish our directions of our seams. So this is going to go towards the body and away from the cat faces. So this is a 75% partial block. These are towards the cat face. And down here, away. Okay, so this is a 25%. And this one, let's see, these were towards the cat and away from the cat. Just get it started. And you see I leave a good amount of overlap when I sew these. And this is a 50%. So this measures 6.5 inches, and you see the seam allowance does complete that 6.5 inches. This is the other side of this block that we'll be actually be using. This would be in row 3. This is going to go, let me back that up. This would be on the right hand side of row 3 because it's a face, a partial face. And this would be on the left hand. Oh, hold on. Whoop. This would be on the right hand side because the feet need to go on the bottom. So keep that in mind. So this would go on the left hand side. So it would go on this side. And let's get our row. This would go on the right hand side of the previous row. So here's the row we're working with. Feet on the bottom. And you see where the feet kind of connect, and this is not going to have like fabrics together, just here at the feet. And it's going to go together just like a full block. It's going to nest right here, nest right here, and nest right here. Okay, then on the opposite side of this row, we're going to have this partial block. Feet are here, so let's rotate it. Here's the foot part that matches. Nothing else goes together. Our seams are going to nest. So, and you don't have to pin these where the seam allowance is going to face your presser foot. I didn't pin most of them. these where the seam allowances are away from my presser foot, I do nest. And make sure here that you're nesting with the correct seam allowance, because there's a pair an inch apart there. All right, and of course you want to match your tops and your bottoms. I'm going to go sew these and I'll be back. Let's see what we got, if we need to make any corrections. I'm going to start on the left side. My seam allowances, as these are facing, is going to the right, so I'm just going to continue that in the same direction. And let's scooch this over a little bit. I paid zero attention right here. Just, I think as long as you are using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, it will work out great for you. So don't stress it. It is okay. And you know what? If it's not perfect, people are going to be so enamored with your tessellation that they won't notice. They're not going to notice a couple of pieces that aren't absolutely perfect. Okay? This is supposed to be fun. All right, so this one's also going to go to the right. Give it a little tiny spritz. All right, and that is now going to be my bottom row. And I've already recorded sewing the rows to each other, so I'm going to switch to that earlier video from this point, and we'll finish this thing up. We are finally to the last step. I actually have already finished this quilt, but as soon as I finished it, my brother called dibs, and he's a tall man, so I want to put another row on, and it's a good thing because my row footage didn't turn out. So let's do this. What you're looking at here is the bottom of the rest of the quilt, the original quilt. And how do I know it's the bottom? Because the cats look right side up, right? Well, this last row here of feet tells me that this is the bottom row. If you want to have your tessellation symmetric from top to bottom, as far as the direction of the cats, or the cats go, then you will need to, you might want to consider taking the feet off, and that way it'll end with a body and start with the body at the top of the block, of the quilt, but you could also add feet to the top of the quilt. They're going to be different from this, but you'll figure it out. It's not a big deal. If you don't figure it out, let me know, and I'll do a short to explain it. All right, so this is the bottom of the quilt. We're adding a row on, which was row 4. So we've repeated, we had 7 rows, and this is our second row 4 repeat that we just finished, right, with the white cats here, and then our partial here and here. So I'm going to rotate this so that the bottom is the bottom. Let's make sure that I stay in frame. And what you will notice here is that everything lines up because of our partial blocks. Okay, but what it's doing is it's shifting 3 inches this way, which would be to the left if we weren't looking at the bottom of the quilt. But because we're looking at the bottom of the quilt, it's shifting to the right. So the pieces that line up are this little foot part here and this part on the cat body. And this it's actually 3 inches that overlap, but these 2-inch part here is the only part where it will nest. Okay, so let me scooch it over a little bit so you can see that that still holds true as we move along. So it's 3 inches overlapping, but there's only 2 parts where it will nest, which is right here. So you may have to flip some seams left or right as you sew and clip them at the end, but it's easier than trying to keep track of all of it as you're sewing these rows together. All right, But easy peasy, nothing else is going to nest, so you don't have to worry about aligning anything else. The back legs are going to line up with the butt, and the chest is going to line up so that you have your two little feet. All right, let's get this pinned together. So I'm just going to flip this on top, and I'm going to nest this first seam. The seams are already in the correct direction. And I'm going to nest the second seam. And let's see, the seams are not in the same direction, but this seam is for the whole block. This seam on the back is just this little part, so you'd have to snip it. So instead of making myself go back and snip it, I'm just going to flip this seam when I iron it so that it goes with that short seam on the back and put a pin in it. I'm going to make sure that my starting corners match, and I'm just going to pin it away from the path of my presser foot. And even though I should do that here, it is easier for me to pin this way, but I am going to pin away from the path of my presser foot just to keep this aligned as I sew. Then I'm going to go to the next block and I'm going to do the same thing. So these two will nest, and let's get this quilt up here. And 2 inches away, these will nest. I'm going to flip my seam again. And I'm flipping the seam that's between the blocks so I don't have to snip a partial seam on the back side. Okay. Then after I get those, I'm going to come back and I'm going to put 2 pins in here. If you find that this is wonky, like it's too short, or you've got a lot of fabric on the top and a little on the bottom, make sure that you didn't align this first seam with this seam. Okay, it's going to be, of the 1, 2, 3, it's going to be the second seam on the foot side. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pin all of this, and then we'll get it sewn together. All right, let's go sew. All right, I'm going to start this with a back stitch because we're sewing our rows together. All right, now we can just sew. So now I just need to remove all of my pins. You might want to sew this from the other side since this is where all of the seams are, where the feet are. But it looks like I only flipped one. All right, let's see what we've got. Give it a little spritz of water right along the seam. So that looks pretty good. Just as an aside, if you're not going to put a border around this pretty soon, then I recommend stay stitching around the edge of this because we have so many little blocks that can pull apart. Like I have this pulling apart a little bit right here. So I recommend doing a little stay stitch all the way around the outside at 1/8 of an inch to keep everything together until you're ready to put a border on it or sandwich it and put your binding on. So that's it, my friends. Okay, my lovelies. Well, that was the end of part 2. For this quilt, we went over the legs and the layout. In the first video, we went over the bodies. So if you haven't seen that, I will post that at the close of this video. Also, if you are interested in the pattern and you haven't bought it, it is down below in the description. And here is a QR code that you can scan with your phone if that's more convenient. I'm going to say that I really had fun making this quilt. It was like a brain challenge to figure out, based on that initial Lego pattern, the best way for my brain to get this put together. I hope you'll give it a try, or if you want to solve the problem yourself, that you'll snapshot that Lego pattern at the beginning and try figuring out an option for yourself. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you'll give me a like and a subscribe if you did, and I would love to see you in the next video. I know it's a little weird finding the bell button, but you may want to engage your notifications because I don't post on a regular basis. I post when I get a project finished. I've already started the next project. So, you know, good things coming. It'll be the autumn quilt, I think. So I'll see you soon. Have a beautiful week. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. See you soon.